I am Lloyd Preston Baxley, Senior. I'm 84 years old. It's past March the 2nd. First, I'd like to say that the yeoman in the Navy that made up my discharge paper, he made some mistakes, and I'd like to correct them. The first mistake he made was that he has me on the USS Ancon twice. I only served on it once through one invasion. And the other mistake is he, on the campaigns, he has me in the Asiatic Pacific campaign ribbon. I didn't go to the Pacific. I was in the Atlantic, in the European theater. And as far as I know, that sets the record straight. I did, however, serve another inactive duty 4 years after I got married, after I was discharged from the Navy. And so, I first heard about World War II when it happened, on December the 7th, I guess it was. My brother and I had purchased a 35 Ford Coupe, and we had being originally from Hemingway, we were on our way back to Charleston. My people moved to Charleston from Hemingway during the construction of the Santee Cooper. And that was what I was doing in Charleston. Anyway, it was a Sunday afternoon, and we were between North Santee and South Santee when we had the radio on and when we heard it. And I don't know, it done something to me. So I had a job, and he did too, and we were working at West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company at that time. But anyway, we had, he and I had moved to an apartment on King Street, he and I. And anyway, I couldn't get the Navy off my mind, so June the 16th, I believe it was, I was 17, and I got my parents to sign, and I joined the Navy. All right, they sent me to Norfolk for my boot camp training, and that's listed on my discharge. But after boot camp, they sent me 2 or 3 places in Norfolk, and then they transferred me to the USS Harry Lee. All right, and it was a training ship, transport ship. And what they were training us for was to run these Higgins boats to make invasions. And I got transferred off to Harry Lee on to the Joseph Hughes. And when I finished training on the Joseph Hughes, they made a coxswain out of me. Now, a coxswain is the man that pilots the boat. At that time, they had what they called a bow hook, and the engineer, and that was the boat crew. And how I got to be coxswain, apparently, was they picked the man that could run it on the beach and back it off the best. And I happened to be chosen. So that's why I became the coxswain. I didn't, however, get promoted at that point. When I got promoted was, I seem to be like it was when I caught the USS Ancon. Now the Ancon was a cruise ship, and I caught it in Boston. And I'm not sure, but I believe it was Brookline, Boston. But anyway, it was a luxury liner. And the Navy had took it over, and it had a swimming pool on it, several thousand records, a jukebox, staterooms. It was uptown, and the latest shapes of modern ships. I was right proud to be on it. I met a man when I went up the gangplank with my sea bag. Am I too fast for you?
No, you're fine.
And this man's name was Otis Bragdon. And he asked me where I was from, and I told him Charleston. And he says, well, join the crowd, I'm from Georgetown. And he was my boatswain mate, or my boss, as long as I was on the Ancon. He was a real nice fellow, real mild-mannered, and we got along great. Anyway, I don't know how long it was, but anyway, they finished the ship and what they were going to do to it, and we got it loaded, and loaded with soldiers, and we set out, and at that time, it was probably the biggest convoy that ever crossed the Atlantic. And that was my first taste of the Atlantic. And it can be a nasty place. Anyway, my watch was in the crow's nest. Now that's upside the smokestack. That's the highest point on the ship. I was a lookout. And anyway, we were headed somewhere, and I didn't know where. I guess there was a lot of people that knew, but I wasn't one of them. But I did know that I was supposed to run that boat when we got wherever we was going on the beach and carry soldiers. And we had been trained on how we would do it. When we arrived at our destination, they were to lower us in the water, and we would to circle, and they would call us in one by one on each side of the ship, and I happened to be on the port side of the ship, and I was the last one they called in. Now, there were several types of boats. There was the kind that had the ramp in front that let down, and then there was the kind that carried personnel. The one I run was the kind that carried personnel. They jumped over the side. The other kind was, I guess there was LCTs, I believe, what they call landing craft. Or it may have been something else. But anyway, they had a steel ramp that dropped in the front, and you could drive off. It could carry a jeep, but mine couldn't. I could only carry personnel. Anyway, on the ship, there was 3 of us stayed in a stateroom. And one of them's name was O'Donnell, and he was from Massachusetts, and I believe Revere, somewhere like that. I'm not sure of that. But him and his bow hook stayed there, and myself. Now, my bow hook stayed in another stateroom. But anyway, we got to be good friends going across the Atlantic, me and O'Donnell, and his bow hook. And so when we got to where we were going, they called for us to unload. And they put me in the water. And I immediately, when they put me in the water, I seen machine gun bullets coming from shore. And I knew then we was in war. Anyway, I was the last one to call. I guess I carried officers. And they called me in, and I loaded with officers. And I was right behind him, O'Donnell. And we went into a little place called Ferryville. And Ferryville is located east of Casablanca, French Morocco. But anyway, I carried the officers, and they killed O'Donnell. They shot him through the machine gun bullet, got him through the hip and severed his artery, and he bled to death before we could get him up on the beach. But anyway, I survived that, and I got back to the ship, and I shuttled back and forth to the beach most of that day. But in the meantime, the Germans, it took North Africa, and that's North Africa, French Morocco. That's part of North Africa. And they had also took France, and they took the French Navy. And the French had a battleship named the Jean Bart. And I didn't know this till not too many years ago, when a friend of mine up the road told me that battleship didn't have no engines in it, but the guns worked. And it supposed to have been anchored off Fidala, but it wasn't. They had towed it into the harbor of Casablanca, along with some other heavy cruisers and destroyers and whatever. But anyway, I sat in my boat, shuttling back and forth, and watched the Massachusetts sink the Jean Bart. Now, the Jean Bart was in the harbor, and it also sunk another French, looked like a heavy cruiser to me. All right, that covers the first day up until that night, until that night. All right, the first night, a U-boat come in there and sank the Joseph Hughes, and it was anchored ahead of us. All right, we picked up the survivors of the Joseph Hughes, and that was so much for that night. And the next afternoon, we were still shuttling, unloading, and I guess the sun was about an hour high, and all the transports was anchored. And a submarine was east of us, a U-boat, and I was tied on the starboard side. That was the side that was torpedoes was coming from. And they shot a torpedo and hit another transport. And I cut loose right quick to go pick up the fellas that was jumping overboard off it. And before I could get to it, they hit another one. All right. Immediately after that, all the ships slipped their anchor chain. In other words, instead of pulling it up, they cut it loose and dropped it. And they got underway and left us. And I know the Augusta was involved in it. I believe the Augusta, it was a heavy cruiser, was the flagship. I'm pretty certain it was. And the battleship New York was there, and how I know it was there, I don't think it participated in the battle with the Jean Bart, because a destroyer, after our ships left us, a destroyer come out and told us to go into the harbor to get from out there, that they would pick up the rest. And on my way in, I heard somebody hollering, "Help!" And what it was the New York had put a boarding party aboard this French fishing boat. And they said it was leaking. And they wanted to get off of it, so they was in a rowboat, and I picked them up. And that's what they told me. Plus they had got all the wine they could get, they had it stacked. Anyway, I carried them on into the harbor, into the little Fidala harbor. And then the Army got involved in it to set us up some pup tents so we could, at least have something to sleep on. And they set us up some pup tents beside the street. And the sniper shot at us all night long, and it rained, and the water run through my pup tent. So that really taught me a lesson that I didn't want to be in the Army. All right, and then the next day, we got word for us, all the boats, to go to Casablanca. And we did. We all got in a row and we went to Casablanca. And that evening, all our ships come back in, and what could dock in Casablanca docked. And that's when we seen the damage that the Massachusetts had done, and whoever else was shooting. There was a lot of shooting going on there. And so, anyway, we worked all night unloading, and they sniped at us all night. It didn't hit nobody and hurt nobody, but we had already lost one man, O'Donnell, and we lost another fellow that fell in the hole. I don't know, I didn't know him. So that, and I didn't see him either, so that was just rumor. But anyway, we come on back to, after that was that, and they got established good. We come back to the United States. And that's when I got transferred to catch this LST. Now that's a landing ship tank. It's built to carry tanks. And it really is built as a kind of a one-way ship. And it's made to carry tanks. It has bow doors on it that open and a ramp on it. And it won't do but about 10 knots wide open. And so I, after some time, We carried it out for a shakedown cruise. It was brand new, and it come a heavy fog. In New York, somewhere up there in the Hudson River over in New York, and you couldn't see your hand before your face. But anyway, to make a long story short, at that point, the captain they had given us, I had seen some things about him that I didn't care too much about. But anyway, when we got back in, he had a heart attack. And they took him off. And they give us a real captain. And his name was Ulysses C. Grant. And he was the captain from the bow to the stern, to the top, to the bottom. He was one of the most amazing men that I ever seen in my whole life. I have never seen him scared. I've never seen him in a situation he couldn't handle. The weather didn't get too bad for him. The war didn't get too rank for him. He was always in control. I admired him. And apparently he admired me. Because when we got back across the Atlantic, and that was some doing because we couldn't travel but 10 knots. It took a long time. We picked up a pilot in Gibraltar. Now, Gibraltar was controlled by the British. And the pilot liked to wreck the ship and the dock. He rammed it into the dock, and that, so far as I can remember, this was the last time we ever picked up a pilot. You're supposed to pick up one when you go to a port, but he didn't do that anymore. And he told me, from now on, you take a boat, and I'll put it up close, and you take the boat and you shove me in. And I did that as long as I was on the 316. When we went back over the second time on the 316, we landed in a place called Algiers. And we were loaded with things like bulldozers, tanks, you name it. We even carried a big, I believe it's an anyway, it's a big barge, had 2 big outboard motors on the back of it. And we had it on the deck, carried it on the deck, strapped down to where we could tilt the ship and launch it. It was pretty good engineering to do that, but we did. And and then we kept following the army down in the Mediterranean. As they would take a place, we would go in it. And we kept on following them on down till we landed. We wound up in a place in Algiers called Bizerte. And Bizerte had a small channel that led into 11-mile lake. And this is where we stayed, anchored, for quite some time. I can't remember how long, but it was a long time. And I do remember the Germans would aggravate us almost every night with flares and air alerts. And I guess they did that over 100 times. So you couldn't, it was a nerve situation that you could go to bed and know you had to get up and look to be bombed. The closest they come of hitting us, they splashed water on the ship with a bomb, and they didn't, as far as I know, they didn't sink anything. Then it come time to invade Sicily. So we loaded all up, and we went and invaded Sicily at La Cotta. It was the same old thing, the bombing, and then the shelling with the ships, and then the amphibious force. But when I got on the 3/16, I got out of the boats, invading the boats. I got in the ship's crew, so I didn't have to drive a boat on it. But anyway, we always carried General Patton's crew, and I'm sure you've heard of him. He was some general. And about the biggest thing I remember about that was that I met a man that come from out of the hills with a column of Italian prisoners and a few German prisoners. I think there was 900 and something of them. And he marched them on the ship, and we took them back, I guess, to Bizerti, I guess. And I spoke with him because I knew him. And he's one of two men that I met during the war that I knew. And the other man that I met was Dan Cannon from Hemingway, and he was on the Red Wing. It was an ocean-going tug, and I met him in Bizerti. I had a bad pain in my side, and I went to the hospital and spent the night, and they bummed it, and I decided I'd be better off on the ship, so my pain got better. I went back to my ship. So I didn't have no idea of staying in that for 30 days or 2 weeks or a week. I'd rather been on my ship. Anyway, that was the invasion of Sicily. The next we went, when they took Sicily, the next go-round was to invade Italy. And we got all ready to go to invade Italy, and we didn't know where we was going to land at. But the evening before we was to hit the beach next morning at daylight, is when we heard the news that Italy had surrendered. And about 30 minutes after we got out whooping that we would probably be greeted with flowers, here come a German plane down through the column of ships, strafing and bombing. And so this brought us back to reality. And then we carried Montgomery's army of soldiers in the invasion of Salerno. Now this was a bloody mess. And then we carried Montgomery's army of soldiers in the invasion of Salerno. Now this was a bloody mess. The Germans had come out with a 88 gun, and they had that woman over there we used to listen to. It was a propaganda woman. She told us about it, and so that's where we met it. And anyway, we stayed there for, I guess, 2 days while they held 40 yards of beachhead, and that's not much. Trying to decide whether they was going to take them off the beach or not. And this would have been a catastrophe to try to get them back off the beach. But anyway, it's long and the short of it, we didn't. And they finally moved a little bit, and finally they broke out. And so then we started hauling reinforcements. And I think our next trip was to Tripoli, Libya. We run short on groceries. But the British had plenty of corned beef. They had plenty of it. And so we survived off corned beef and powdered iced potatoes for a long, long time. Because the other ships that went to Bizerti, that's where our supply ship come, was picking our groceries up. And here we were starving to death almost. But anyway, the long and the short of it, we over that. And one of the other things that was real memorable about in the Mediterranean was they bypassed, we had already took Sicily, and the Army bypassed Sardinia. And we spent Christmas Day in Ajaccio, Corsica. Now that's where Napoleon was born. But anyway, we likely had a catastrophe. We run into some real bad weather when we were sight of Sardinia. And we lost we lost the steering on the ship. And we were loaded with equipment, and I felt sure it was going to roll over, and everybody else did too. So we had lost the steering, and the captain sent me and 2 or 3 more, take 2 or 3 more, to go down into Shaft Alley and see if we couldn't turn it around. They had a manual steering down in there. And I almost got claustrophobia. But I did go, and we did turn it around by hand. And then the weather was as such that we had to go back into Sardinia when we turned back around and got the sea behind us. The only way we could get into the port was through a minefield. And he chose to go through the minefield. And I was sure we was going to hit a mine, but we didn't. Anyway, we over that, and we went on to Ajaccio, Corsica, and spent Christmas Day. I remember what year it was, but anyway, I know it was Christmas Day. And then we came back, and the war was going pretty good in Italy, and we got orders to go to Oran. Now, Oran's in Algiers. And in the meantime, they had made another invasion. I can't think of the place right now. I'll think of it in a minute. And I wondered why we were leaving and they were still invading. But anyway, make a long story short, we headed out of the Mediterranean. And we all thought we were coming back home. And I was on watch when the captain gave the order to come right to so-and-so that pointed right straight to England. And anyway, we wound up in England. And I believe we went to Portland, Weymouth, in the English Channel. We arrived at the mouth of the English Channel at night, and we had to stay outside until daylight because the E-boats was too bad. And anyway, we went back in next day. We went on in there, and mostly our operating port was in Portland, Weymouth, and that's in the English Channel. One of the things, now we visited several ports, but that was really, I remember more about Portland, Weymouth than any of the rest of them. I've been to Southampton, and but anyway, while I was in the Mediterranean, let me go back a little bit. After we took Sicily, we made a long trip around to the heel of Italy. Now that's in the heel, in the instep of the heel of the Italy boot. Italy's shaped like a boot. And we had a fellow on the ship that his grandfather lived there in Toronto. And the captain gave him permission to go see his grandfather. And we were supposed to pick him up at the bridge, down the drawbridge, and pick him up at the bridge the next morning. And I went back to pick him up. He wasn't there. So we left him. And he was a long, long time getting back on the ship. But anyway, we trained into England, and trained and trained and trained. And we'd already been trained enough. We knew what we had to do. And then it come time for the big one. And we towed a barge behind us across the English Channel, and we were loaded. And just as far as you could see in any direction, they were ships. Just as far as you could see in any direction. And in the sky, when it got light enough to see, you couldn't count the planes, the bombers. And that was the assault. And this was the big deal. I understand there was 6,000 killed in the first hour. They shot up one of our boats, but he made it back to the ship, less one crewman, and he got shot in the heel. And the last accounts they had for him, he was running down the beach. His name was Dicus. But anyway, we over that, and we shuttled back and forth to the beach. And in the English Channel, they got as much as a 27-foot tide. Now that's a lot of tide. And we'd run the ship on the beach on high tides to unload the tanks and whatever we had. And we had to wait till high tide to get off the beach because you could walk around the ship. And we was at the mercy of the aircraft or whatever, whoever. There was nothing we could do except shoot at them. We couldn't go nowhere. But anyway, that was something to see. something I hope I never have to see again. We shuttled back and forth across the English Channel. I remember this much about it. We were going across the channel one night with 5 ships, with 1 escort, and an E-boat coming there and sank 2 of them, 285s. And we went on up the Seine River to a place called Rouen, and the LST-6 anchored in the mouth of the Seine River and swung around and hit a mine, and it sank. So that was 4 out of the 5, right? Or let's see, maybe I counted wrong. 3 out of the 5. And up that river, the Germans had sunk a freighter across the river, and we went through all right. The engineers had blown a way through it, but coming back, we tore one propeller up. But we made it back and changed the propeller. But anyway, we shuttled till they thought Patton was making pretty good progress. And then they finally decided to let us come home. And that old ship had been on the way so much till we loaded up with empty shells and started back across the Atlantic. I think out of the 14 ships that left the United States in that group, I think 6 got back. One of them got sunk in London. One of them V2s blew the whole bridge off, and we kept losing them, and that's what we wound up. I think somebody counted 6 out of the 14 survived. And we carried it up to Chesapeake Bay to Baltimore, Maryland, and I piped the flag down. We scrapped it, decommissioned it. And then they asked me where I wanted to go, and I wanted to go to Charleston, and I picked the wrong naval district and wound up in Pensacola, Florida. And I really had a ball down there for 3 or 4 months. They sent me to replace a fellow running a tugboat, but he apparently had more pull than I had, because he kept his job on the tugboat, running the tugboat, and he sent me to the down to the crash boats to pick up them fellows that crash, that flying them naval aircraft at night and daytime too. What we were supposed to do is, if one of them crashed, is go out and hook onto him and keep him floating until we could get a crane out there to pull him out. That was good duty, and I didn't sleep in barracks. I stayed, me and another fellow, he was in charge of one group, and I was in charge of the other. And that ended my naval career. I started to stay in, but that ended my naval career. After I come out of the Navy, I still had my job at West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company. And I went back to work, and then I had an aunt that lived up here. And I was visiting up here one Sunday, and that's when I met my wife. And I was smitten, and she was too. And she was going to college at Winthrop, and I was going back to work at West Virginia. And make a long story short, we got married in, this must have been long in April or May, somewhere there. We got married in September. And we moved to Charleston. And she didn't like Charleston. And she made me promise her to see about coming to International. And I didn't want to come, but she did. And so she overruled, and I did come down there, and I did get a job. I remember going in and asked the man, his name was H.C. Herring. He had his feet cocked up on the desk and his hat pulled down over his eyes, and I walked in the door. He said, "What can I do for you, young man?" I said, "I'm looking for a job." He said, "What can you do?" I said, "Well, I'm working in a power plant in West Virginia." So this got him on his feet, or he took his feet off the desk and he throwed his hat up. He said, "Well, if you're working in a power plant, why do you want to come down here?" I said, "Mr. Herring, I don't, but my wife does." And he laughed and laughed and laughed. He said, "I believe I have heard it all now." Anyway, he said, "I don't have anything now, but I'll tell you what I'll do. If I have anything, I'll write you a letter." And I didn't hardly get home before he wrote me a letter and offered me a job. And I thoroughly enjoyed what I was doing. I was a good man, a good hustler, and I come to work for a good foreman. He was a nice fellow, and they got to think quite a bit of me. They put me with the best man they had, and he couldn't hardly write his name, but he was one of the best men they had. His name was James Nikkei. And then they transferred my boss, George Priest, to another mill. And they gave James George a job. And then I took James's job. I worked on turbines, power turbines, and all the critical stuff in the power plant. You're looking at the man that put the first drop of water in the canal. I'm the man. Now, there were some more people with me, but he sent me to inspect it after it was constructed. And I took off my shoes and went down there, and they left brick bats and 2x4s and all kind of junk in it. And I went back and told him, and he says, "Well, we won't take it. We'll make them clean it out." So after they come back and said they'd got it all ready to go, then I went back with the crew, and we tried the pumps out, pump water in the canal, and then they turned it over to the operating crew. And I stayed with International for 14 years. And they had a terrible layoff between 58 and 61, somewhere along in there. And they cut everybody back. I was drawing top pay, and they cut me back to helping. I told them I couldn't stand that. And so I left International Paper Company and went to Palatka, Florida. I knew a fellow in Palatka, Florida, and he gave me a foreman's job. And in the first of 72, this was in 1961. In the first of 72, I moved my family down there. And I didn't sell my house up here. And the man that hired me left after, I guess, a year or so. And when he left, I got his job. And I kept that job for around 11 years. I was in charge of all the maintenance for the paper mill, all the tracks and grounds, all the buildings. I was the fire chief, and I was a valued employee. And then in '72, I got lung cancer in this right lung, and they cut 3 ribs out of my back. And the top lobe out, and a big piece of the bottom lobe on the right-hand side. And I had to retire. And I got 1 son, 3 daughters and 1 son. And I wanted to make a veterinarian out of him. And I sent him to Francis Marion. And one day he come after he'd been going a couple of years. He come home and he said, "Daddy, I don't want to be no veterinarian." He says, "I want a farm." And I tried to discourage him, and he wouldn't. I couldn't discourage him. He says, "This is what I want to do." And I said, "Well, if you want to do, I'll try to advise you and help you. I could get around, you know, and I can do so much." And since that time, he and I together, we've bought some 500 acres of land. He's probably the biggest farmer in Georgetown County. He is a good farmer. He's well respected. He loves horses. I've always kept him in a horse. But he raises and trains cutting horses. It tears my heart out to see what's happening to our country today. When the men and women went into World War II, gung-ho, everybody was willing to do this, to do that. And now this country being run by, looked like a contest of people who could steal the most. But it tears my heart out to see my country in the shape it's in now. And there's nothing's wrong with it except a bunch of thieves and politicians. It's something that I was born during the Depressions, and I know all about not having no money. I know all about that. I know when the banks took off everybody's money that had money in banks. And it's gone beyond that. If the people of the United States don't come alive and stop going in debt, we're already in so far now, there's no way in the world your grandchildren can come out of it.